Welcome back to Citizen Earned. This video is the 7th in the Second Amendment playlist and follows from episode 20, Basic Firearm Safety. In that episode, I concluded by saying that most people don't understand what the purpose of a gun is. When asked, they say it is to kill. There, I said that I have found a different purpose for a gun. In this episode, I will be answering the question, what is the purpose of a gun? Since this has to do with the Second Amendment series and playlist, I feel it necessary to review the Second Amendment, which reads, a well-regulated militia, being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms, shall not be infringed. So guns. Gun. No, not gun. Nerf. Gun. But Nerf. Gun. So, the thing that the Nerf gun has in common with any other firearm is that it's kind of useless without darts or ammunition. If it's empty, I can possibly stand there and look cool with it. Do like James Bond poses, or I guess like this. Or I can hit people with it, right? Or I could throw it at someone. Hollywood likes to do this a lot, where people throw away their guns for no reason. I don't understand, but that's about all I can do with this until I put darts in it. Once I have a dart in there, I can use it for its intended purpose, right? The point is, guns are kind of useless without ammunition. So before I go into answering what is the purpose of a gun, we need to talk about ammunition so that it makes sense to everyone. Okay, so the various parts of ammunition. So this, all put together, is a round. This is the primer, case, powder, and bullet or projectile. In this case, I drew the powder as being inside of the case. However, I could have very easily drawn it to be a little pile on the bench beside the ammo. So please don't let this part be confusing here, because the flash hole is kind of open to that, and the primer should be in the primer pocket inside of the brass case. This is the best I can do. I'm not great with animations. Please be gracious. So the function and the purpose of these parts is the primer gets struck by something hard and sharp, and it turns that kinetic energy, or that strike, into a mini explosion that comes from this and goes through the flash hole and ignites the rest of the powder. The powder then burns and explodes, building pressure to push the bullet or the projectile out. Now I know somebody is going to say powder burns quickly, it doesn't explode. Well, actually, that's being a little pedantic, because at the end of the day, currently, we can measure the burn rate of all chemicals. I realize that the burn rate for most black powder and modern propellants or powders is somewhere between 170 and 630 meters per second, and that explosives are typically around 1800 to 8000 meters per second. But I think it's a little pedantic to say that one is an explosive and the other one burns quickly. They all burn quickly, or they all explode. Some of them just do it faster than others. Okay. Aside all of that, this, when assembled, looks like this. Here is a little difficult for me to draw this, but this dotted line here is actually the base of the bullet. So the bullet is from the base all the way to the tip here. And it is keeping the powder organized inside here, keeping it not necessarily compressed, but there's not a lot of room for the powder to move and wiggle around, at least on most rounds. So here you can see the primer will get struck and can produce a spark or a mini tiny little explosion that will send sparks and fire into the case, igniting the rest of the powder, and it will burn or explode, whichever term you want to use, and then that's going to build pressure and it's going to poke the bullet out that way. So if we put this entire vessel inside of a chamber that has a barrel attached to it going forward, So here we have the chamber, we have the barrel, and we have the rifling. So this guy goes boom, starts burning, builds his pressure, out comes the projectile or the bullet, and it starts engaging with the rifling. Now it's going to travel that way and it's going to start spinning. That's what a shot is all about. So the key takeaway here is that the bullet will travel in the direction that the barrel is aimed. In fact, all of the mechanisms in the gun are designed to get this part done here, to make sure that this projectile leaves in the direction and at the specific moment in time that the human wants it to leave the barrel. There's an awful lot that has gone into firearm design over the centuries to make sure that that particular thing happens exactly when it's supposed to. For instance, a person doesn't want to be walking around somewhere and then just randomly this little guy gets struck by something and this thing goes off when the barrel isn't pointed where it should be at the time that the person wants it to go off. To further illustrate this, let me take you through the firearm side of this. So here we have a SIG 938. It is empty, the magazine is empty, and let me disassemble it real quick so that we can look what goes on the inside. So this is the lower frame that houses the trigger assembly, the trigger and magazine well, and a whole bunch of other things. And this is the slide with the barrel and the recoil spring and rod installed. Remove the recoil spring and rod, guide rod I guess, and then lift the barrel out. So here you can see the blocky part here, that's the chamber part, and then this is the barrel part. And although I know it's dirty, you can kind of look through it this way. So this is the key piece. This piece is what holds that pressure from the explosion and directs the bullet in the correct direction. What it doesn't do is have anything to do with timing. So it's not necessarily able to control when this goes off. For that, we have to go to a different part of the firearm. For the timing portion, this is where we have the trigger, the hammer, and in here you can't see it. There's what's called the mainspring, which is the spring that powers the hammer. This is our safety. I know previously I said not to mess with the safety. In this case, I'm going to have to disable the safety to be able to demonstrate my point. Currently, this frame is in a ready-to-fire configuration. Never mind the fact that it doesn't have the slide or the barrel or the magazine or any ammunition in it. The hammer is cocked back and under tension with the spring. The safety is engaged, so if I go to pull the trigger, it won't go off. If I disable the safety, now when I go to pull the trigger, the hammer will fire. So this allows the human to time the shot. Remember, the slide and the barrel with the chamber all sit up here. This hammer is what imparts kinetic energy into the firing pin that then strikes the ammunition in front of it, causing the explosion and the bullet to come out the front end. So continuing to work back from the bullet, we have the bullet inside of the case with the powder and the primer, inside of the chamber, which is connected to the barrel, which sits inside of the slide. Then the lower houses the trigger, the hammer, the mainspring, some sort of a safety mechanism. It might not be a manual safety like this one. It might be some automatic safeties that exist on Glocks or other striker-fired pistols. And don't worry about this. This is just an aftermarket light. This has nothing to do with any of this stuff. But the point here is that this is all arranged in a way for a human hand to be able to grip it and to be able to manipulate it. I could possibly try to attempt doing the same thing by holding onto this and then putting a live round in here and then using a hammer with a nail to hit the back of it. But that would be dangerous, irresponsible, and stupid, so I'm not going to do that. This thing is what makes what this is supposed to do safe for humans to use and allows the humans to do the whole make sure that it's on target and the right target to be able to squeeze at the right time to get the intended result. There are no parts or pieces here that decide what it should be pointed at, or whether it's the right thing to kill or the wrong thing to kill or destroy. There are no pieces in here that think or feel. There's no emotion, there's no thought, there's nothing that where the gun decides I should shoot a projectile at this thing or at that thing, or I shouldn't shoot right now. These are inanimate objects. Especially when they're taken apart like this, they can't do anything. Even when they're assembled and put down on a surface, they can't do anything dangerous until they're picked up by human hands. Now, I'm sure that there's somebody out there that wants me to talk about the different types of magazines and the way that ammunition can be organized in a firearm. For instance, this is a box magazine, a removable box magazine. There are also things like tubular magazines, commonly found on lever-action rifles, or drum magazines, popularized by the Thompson machine gun, or belts, or various other ways to organize and store ammunition so that the firearm can do its job of launching those projectiles intentionally and accurately. And some people might be wondering, what is called a clip? If this is a magazine, and most of the time firearms use magazines as opposed to clips, then what is a clip? Well, I don't have one here, but a stripper clip is just another way to organize ammunition to be able to typically load it into a magazine that's shipped on a clip. Or in the case of older service rifles, think World War I, where the clip was actually used to jam the ammunition into the rifle's internal box magazine. In the case of an M1 Garand, the end block that holds all of the rounds that goes into the rifle along with the ammunition and forms part of the box magazine. Those can all be considered clips to some extent. Again, the whole clip magazine thing, just like the explosion burn rate thing, it's a little pedantic because everybody knows what you're referring to is the thing that feeds the firearm. The gas tank. Regardless, the point of the gun is to launch the projectile accurately and intentionally. So why does it look like this? Well, it looks like this specifically, and it has these features, including the safety on board and the sights, to facilitate the accuracy and the intention for the human body. You see, this is a rigid object made out of metal and some plastic, without computers or logic or any ability to think. This is a squishy meat sack, and more often than not, it is the connection for the gun to the ground. Now the ground, again, is very stable. It's most of the time, it's not squishy. I guess if you're on water, but that's why it's so difficult to shoot from water, because if you don't have a solid foundation, this rigid object can't do the whole accuracy and intentional thing very well. So the whole point is to get this anchored to as stable a surface as possible so that the accuracy and the intention can be as precise as possible. So a gun fulfills 6 distinct functions. Other people will argue that there's 8. Some will say there's only 4. Again, pedantic. But those 6 functions are to provide an interface for the human to put the bullet where the human wants that bullet to go, provides a way for humans to accurately line up the barrel with the target through the sights, carries ammo safely until it's ready to use, which would be the magazine in here. I hope you all caught that trigger finger going into the trigger well accidentally. And then obviously, when the firearm is ready to use, contains that pressure from the ammunition in the chamber and launches the projectile through the barrel toward the intended target, which results in it accurately sending the projectile on its way. And in most modern firearms, semi-automatics, for most civilians, and fully automatics or select fire, which would include 3-round burst for military and some very rich civilians. The gun's last purpose or last function is to then reload so that it can be repeated. That whole cycle can be repeated. The whole bang part. So next, I'm going to move on to the meat sack part and how to make that as stable as possible, since it's the squishiest bit between the firearm and the ground. Alright, sorry about this. I realize that this is suboptimal, but it's the best I can do with currently what I've got. What I need to show you is my feet and my hands. My face doesn't matter so much, so let's just keep the face out of the picture, okay? Okay, so this is a rifle. Let me show you the difference between rifle and a handgun in grip and stance, and why a rifle is always superior to a handgun. I'm going to make the ATF a little bit mad here and turn my rifle, that's already an SBR, without proper paperwork, we'll get to that soon enough, into a pistol, and then I'm going to take that pistol and I'm going to shorten it into an actual pistol. Okay, so I got my handgun here. So in order to show you this effectively, I have to break rule number 1 and I have to point it at the camera. Luckily this is a Nerf gun. Luckily there's nothing behind the camera. Do realize that I am aware of the fact that I am breaking rule number 1. So with handguns, there's only 2 points of contact. The hands. This is inferior in every way compared to a rifle because a rifle has 4 points of contact. The only reason that we do this is because it's easier to conceal. Maybe not this one, but with tip firearms. I realize I'm printing and all of that. Yeah, but you get the point. I can actually put it inside of my jacket, whereas with the rifle, that's next to near impossible. Bet some of you want to see me try though. Okay, so before it was laughable, now it's just going to be ridiculous. Very difficult to conceal this. Point made? Go. Okay, a rifle has 4 points of contact. Let me illustrate. It's got 1 hand, 2 hand, 1 shoulder, and 1 cheek weld. And I'm going to work in there. So, that means it's much easier to hold this stable and still for that accurate and intentional release of the projectile. There's a whole lot less wobbling than if I were out here with 2 hands shaking the gun around. So I need to now go over the proper stances in order to turn this meat sack into a reasonable foundation for the firearm to do its job properly. At risk of making all of the pedantic fools out there angry at me and to start all kinds of arguments about which stance is better or what they're called and so on and such forth, let's just go with feet about shoulder width apart, the isosceles, and then 1 foot forward is the weaver. There's all kinds of hybrids and modifieds. Those are 2 terms that you're probably going to hear. Let me make it easy. Feet shoulder width apart and combat stance. And the reason for this is because with feet shoulder width apart, some people shoot better this way, and there's nothing wrong with it. It's not necessarily better or worse. There are benefits and detriments to each. With the feet shoulder width apart, there's very little forward backward stability. By placing 1 foot slightly forward of the other one, you not only get the same side to side stability, but you also get the front to back stability. This is why in boxing or other martial arts, people tend to have a wider stance because they can take punches from the front or from the sides. They can also easily and quickly move. The maneuverability is important. So we're going to call this the fighting stance and this the feet shoulder width apart stance. Simple enough? So that kind of gets our interface with this meat sack solid on the ground. Now the next interface, the next important bit, is how the gun is interfaced to the hand. The key piece here is this web. This changes slightly from revolvers to pistols. Regardless, the higher up a person's grip is on the gun, so instead of gripping it down here, this is not a very good grip, take that web and really push it up high onto the grip of the gun. The next point to make is to grip with these 3 fingers and this thumb. So ignore the trigger finger, grip with this, and learn to isolate the trigger finger from this grip. So what I'm going to try to do is grip the firearm lock my hand in place, and then just pull with the trigger finger. I'm not going to continue to squeeze my hand as I'm pulling the trigger finger. This finger and these 4 fingers, or 3 fingers and a thumb, again, depending on how pedantic you want to be, work independently. 4 and 1. Now, of course, if you're missing digits, I'm sorry, I don't mean to be offensive, but you'll have to grip with the remaining digits. The web goes up. The grip gets put in place. On this side, I have 3 fingers and a thumb, and they are going to squeeze nice and tightly. Trigger finger is safely off the trigger, nice and high, and ready to move to the trigger whenever there is need for accuracy and intentionality. So this is a good single-handed grip. However, I do have 2 hands, and I probably want to work that in to incorporate an even better base for the gun to be able to do its job of launching that projectile accurately and intentionally. So on the other side, I'm going to take this hand and this part of the thumb, I'm going to roll up as high as I can underneath this thumb. The left thumb, now keep in mind this will be reversed if you're left-handed. The left thumb will kind of push into the gun, but not onto this slide. So it'll go onto the gun. The right thumb will go on top of the left hand. On this side, I'm just gripping this hand with the other hand. So this side, now I'm ready to move my trigger finger to the trigger when I'm ready and shoot. So I realize there is a measure of intentionality here, being that the function of a firearm is to accurately and intentionally launch a projectile. But the trigger squeeze has to be a squeeze and not a jerk. Just because a person says, make it go bang now, doesn't mean it has to be a jerk. It can still be a nice squeeze, and the more a person shoots, the easier it is to see when and where that trigger breaks, or what they refer to as breaking, so when it goes off. I can, for instance, jerk it, or squeeze while maintaining my sight picture and making sure that it's on target. Squeeze. Boy, that really was out. And make sure that I don't disturb the alignment of the barrel with the target with my trigger pull. So let's remember 3 in the thumb and the trigger finger. Okay, let's talk sights for a moment. I'm actually going to bring this to the camera and line the sights up the way that they are supposed to be lined up to explain this particular piece. So the point to the sights is to line up, so here's the front sight and here's the rear sight. The rear sight has a little notch that the front sight kind of fits into. What's unfortunate is that this camera is doing it backwards. What I should be focusing on is the front sight, not the rear sight. These should not be in focus. This one should be in focus, and these should be slightly out of focus. And then that front sight should go on to the target, just like that. And then work that trigger squeeze nice and slow to get it to go bang. Time to make the ATF angry again. Turn this pistol into an SBR, or a short barrel rifle. And there we are, short barreled rifle, SBR. So, having covered the basics from stance to grip, to sight alignment, sight picture, and trigger control of a pistol, we're going to do the same for a rifle. Again, remember that the stance can be feet shoulder width apart, or with one slightly forward of the other in a bit of a fighting stance. The grip stays the exact same for the dominant hand. In this case, since I'm right-handed, it will be the right hand. The supporting hand, actually, let's get rid of this foregrip. It's illegal anyway. So the front hand is supporting the muzzle. The one thing I want to make sure is to not put my hand in front of the muzzle, because of rule number 3, I don't want to be pointing at myself. I don't want to be pointing at anything I don't intend to kill or destroy. So different people will say different things, but if you're supporting the front of the firearm, that's all that's needed. Some firearms don't necessarily have the ability to hold on to the front because the barrel will get hot very quickly, and so a person might have to move down here to the magazine well or something similar. Again, that training aspect, going to see a professional, they will explain different benefits to different techniques. So we have this grip, finger in a safe place. The buttstock, the butt pad, is going to go into my shoulder. Now there's a bone right here, a shoulder bone. I want to make sure that the stock is not on top of that bone, but rather on the inside of that bone in the soft, squishy part. And then I want to pull that rifle in nice and tight. I don't know if you can see on the camera, but it's actually pushing into my shoulder like that. This right hand will be pulling on the rifle, yes, and 3 fingers and the thumb for my grip, and isolating that trigger finger, I'm going to be using the 3 fingers and the thumb to not only grip it, but also pull it back into my shoulder. The left hand can go up here, you can put your thumb on the side, you can put the C-clamp on it, you can wrap around the magazine well, verify with your firearm in your situation with your trainer. And then put it up to my shoulder, pulling it back, and I'm gonna take my floppy meat sack head and I'm gonna put my cheekbone on the rifle. Now I have 1, 2, 3, 4 points of contact. This is why rifles are inherently more accurate and better in every situation except for concealability than a pistol. It makes no sense to me why some people say they want a pistol for home defense. Why would you want a less stable platform to be able to defend yourself and your family if you have the ability to have a more stable platform that is more likely to result in success? Again, on the rifle, I'm going to line up. The Nerf gun doesn't have a rear sight, but let's just imagine there's a rear sight back here. Put that front sight in between the rear sight, focus on the front sight, and put the front sight on the target. It'll look like that. This is the most stable platform that a human being can provide a firearm. Now, long-range shooters with hunting rifle, what people love to refer to as a sniper rifle, can be set on something. But remember, in that case, we're eliminating the meat sack in between the firearm and the stable ground. We're disconnecting the firearm directly with the stable ground. So when the human body is in play, the best way we can keep it as rigid as possible while maintaining the ability to move and maneuver is this situation here. So in any and all of that, I would like to recap the fact that there's no logic or thinking or empathy mechanism anywhere in the firearm. The only logical thinking and empathy mechanism is right here and right here. So if that is not touched by these that are powered by this and by this, that can't hurt anyone. So it can't possibly be the inherent purpose of a gun to kill people. Guns can be used by people to kill other people, but it itself cannot have the purpose of killing things. So along with that misconception that the primary purpose of a gun is to kill, is that some calibers are more dangerous than others, or that by possibly banning one type of gun or one type of ammunition, we can keep people safer. So I looked into this and I found some interesting things with one type of firearm being able to fire another type of firearm's ammunition. Let's go to the range and I'll show you what I mean. I'm now going to demonstrate that certain or multiple different types of firearms can use the same ammunition. In this case, this is a .357 Magnum, and it was originally made in the 50s or 60s, developed around that time. And although I will be shooting it out of a revolver, which is a fairly old design, even though this one is a double action and has been updated over time. I can also shoot that same cartridge in a very old design. This is a 1894 Marlin lever action cowboy gun. Now, when they developed this gun, or this action, 357 didn't exist. This just goes to show that as time progresses and technology progresses, we can take old designs, we can update old designs, we can shoot the same ammunition out of these two. So, first and foremost, gotta put my ears on. Two rounds. Exact same rounds out of the revolver. As time went on and technology changed, we got repeating firearms, or semi, or sometimes fully automatic repeating firearms. A good example of a semi-automatic repeating firearm is a 1911. I'm sure there's a lot of people in the audience that have a particular soft spot for the 1911, as 1911 guys are a special breed. We also have the infamous Thompson machine gun. Now, this is not a machine gun. This is a semi-automatic version of the Thompson machine gun, also referred to as the Tommy gun. Either way, both of them use removable box magazines to make it easier and faster to get ammunition back into the gun. So at this point, we're going to use the exact same rounds, the 45 ACP, loaded into these box magazines and shoot both guns with the same ammo. Here goes the Tommy gun. There goes the 1911. And remember, never forget eye and ear protection. Man, I really wish I brought my fedora. And the 1911. Easy as pie. And then we have a crazy mix-up. This is actually a firearm design from about the 1940s, M1 carbine. This one's chambered in 9mm though. So 9mm is a fairly old cartridge. I mean, it's just over 100 years old now. It's actually older than the design of this firearm. And then about 100 years after the invention of the 9mm, somebody decided to take that old round, this slightly newer firearm, and combine them into something new. This also uses a detachable box magazine. Then as technology progressed again, we got into plastic or polymer framed pistols in the 1980s with the invention of the Glock, which is an extremely simplified and reliable firearm. I know there's a lot of people that might not like them, but that doesn't really matter. Again, it uses a removable box magazine. And then lastly, here we have a SIG P938. I guess we can consider it a pocket pistol or an everyday carry pistol. Lots of people have lots of different names. You can see there's a little bit of fuzz on this one because it gets worn quite often. Also firing the exact same cartridge, the 9mm. So you can see it doesn't really matter what size the firearm is. Manufacturers can make them use almost any type of ammunition. Of course, there are limits, but it's not cut and dried at all. It gets very confusing as time goes on. Now, let's load this. Same ammo from the same box, tiny little magazine. Slightly bigger magazine, but same ammo. And again, same ammo. As always, don't forget your eyes and ears. Start with a carbine. Oop. Failure to feed. Aside the malfunction, not bad. We'll move on to the bigger of the two pistols. Simple. And the tiny little pistol with the tiny little magazine. If you notice, I don't even have enough space to grip with my whole hand. Luckily, the 9 keeps it easy. Okay, so we've looked at some pistol calibers and seen that various pistol ammunition can be fired from handguns and long guns or rifles or carbines or whatever you want to call them. Now let's take a look at a rifle caliber. 3 different styles of rifles. This one, or rather, we're shooting .308. This is specifically M80 ball ammo or military surplus ammo. First rifle that we have, please excuse the firing in the background. We are at a shooting range after all. Anyway, this is the age-old bolt-action hunting rifle, and this has an internal box magazine. So just like all of the other firearms that we've looked up until now that have had removable box magazines, this is also a box magazine, but it is internal to the stock. So the only way for me to load this is to push the rounds in like so, and then when I get ready to shoot, I'll run the bolt and shoot, so on and such forth. This design comes from, let's call it, the late 1800s, early 1900s. We can get extremely pedantic on all of that, but let's just leave it with that. Then, in the let's call it mid-30s, 36, late 30s or so, you had what was called the M1 Garand, which was chambered in .30-06. Now this, obviously, is .308. The action, the technology, the way that this rifle functions is effectively a Garand. However, this one is called an M1A because it's chambered in .308, and most notably, it has a removable box magazine. The original Garand used what was called an end block. Some people refer to it as a clip, and other people like to debate whether it's a clip or an end block or a magazine. I don't care. What matters is that it keeps feeding the rifle so that it can continue to work. And last, this is an FNFAL, also referred to as the right arm of the free world. It was developed in the late 40s, mid to late 40s, also chambered in .308. Obviously, this one is not from that time. The ones that came from that time had wood furniture, wood grips, and this one is obviously a lot scarier looking. Big and black and plastic and all of those evil things, but it's essentially the same rifle. So let's load up the M1A magazine with the same ammo that we loaded in the hunting rifle, and we'll load up the FAL. And I'm willing to bet y'all knows what I'm gonna say next. Eyes and ears. Yep, a little bit more of a kick. Now for the M1A. Oh, I think this might be heavier than the FAL. And then the FAL. Now, this particular rifle likes to throw brass really far out, so I'm going to go ahead and put the brass catcher on. That way I won't accidentally hit the camera. And I don't need the bipod, and I don't need the flashlight. So after the big 308, we now finish with the 223/556. The reason those two numbers are different is because one is a measurement in inches and the other one is a measurement in metric. 223 refers to 0.223, which is the measurement of the diameter of the bullet. Just like 308 is also the same measurement in inches. It's 0.308, so obviously it's slightly bigger. 223 is a little bit smaller. Now, I'm not going to get into all the politics and all the differences between the 223 and the 556. Let's just say that the 556 is the NATO equivalent measured in metric, and it is 5.56 millimeters, also by 45 millimeters. So that's the length of the cartridge, the overall length here. Here we have a bolt-action rifle, again with an internal box magazine that we load through the top. Very similar to the 308 hunting rifle. Then we have an AR-15. This one is specifically built for intensely accurate shooting, so it's like a boat anchor. And as you can see, it doesn't look like a typical black, scary AR-15, but it is exactly the same gun. Well, that would give offense to the owner because this one has had a lot of love and work put into it to make it even more accurate. But it effectively functions the same way. And it uses the good old removable box magazine. Same round. And then here we have a Ruger Mini 14, which is very similar to the M1 carbine that was chambered in 9mm, and the M1A, which was chambered in 308. This has a very similar action, which is exactly the same as all the other ones. And this time I don't even have to say it. Yep. So, that last one, you saw me pull the trigger and I had the safety on. This is a fantastic moment to talk about being familiar with your firearm so that you can be safe and make sure that you don't accidentally pull the trigger when you're not supposed to. Luckily, this time I erred when the safety was on. But could you imagine what might have happened if I thought that the safety was on and it wasn't? Always go back to your basic 4 rules of firearm safety. All right, so another fun thing that I found at the range here with all of the people that helped me put this together is a Mosin-Nagant. And I'm sure you've seen some of this, but the reason that I want to show this particular rifle is because it came with stripper clips. So this is a clip as opposed to the magazines that I pointed out before. Let me demonstrate why the industry went to box magazines. These would be carried in pouches, ammo pouches, whatever. Once a soldier ran out of ammo, they would take one of these, slide it into this little area that's cut out in the breech, and then they would ram they would push. Okay, I'm not gonna go get the hammer. You can also load them one by one. Holy jeez. Okay, I screwed this one up. So that's why we got box magazines, because this gun bit me. The cartridge got stuck in there. We removed the magazine plate on the bottom and hammered it out. So let's just load one round manually into the chamber and then shoot it. Gonna slide it in here. Close the bolt. Now she's live. Man. Those are the communists for you. And then, since you can't really recharge it, you can skewer them. It's kind of crazy, right? And it's a lot of information that people don't seem to share. And I'm not quite sure why. It wasn't all that hard for me to find this information, and I'm not that smart. So I don't really know why most Americans don't know this stuff. Okay, so let's recap. The purpose of a gun is to intentionally and accurately launch a projectile. Where, how, and why the projectile gets launched is the purpose of the human holding the firearm. The features, the caliber, and or the aesthetics do not make the guns more or less dangerous. Instead, they make them fit their function more precisely. An example would be a hunting rifle having a scope, so that the human has what that human needs to be able to fulfill that purpose that that rifle is having, to be able to see far enough away to be able to ethically kill an animal. Or in the case of an AR-15 in a 2 or a 3 gun match, instead of having a scope on top of it, it'll have a red dot sight so that it can more quickly and more accurately punch holes in paper. But that intent, whether to kill that animal or to punch holes in paper, the gun has no way of knowing what it is doing. It's not conscious. It can't think. It can't feel. So all guns are the same level of dangerous. Or to say it in a different way, all guns are the same level of safe. See, if a gun's purpose was to kill, then none of what I'm about to tell you makes any sort of sense. As a brief point of levity, let's just look at some pretty astounding numbers here. Last year, the Small Arms Survey reported that there's 900 and some odd million firearms on the entire planet. About half of those, 480 million or so, were located in the United States of America. Since then, we've had the pandemic and other issues, which has stimulated an intense buying cycle. And it is currently estimated that there's about 600 million firearms in the United States today. Link down below. This is distributed between 30 to a million people in the US. That depends on which statistics a person goes off of and which estimates with which biases a person goes off of. Link down below. And those Americans, the 30 to 1 million Americans that do own firearms, they buy and shoot between 30 and 50 billion rounds of ammunition per year. Again, depending on which sources one trusts. The reason that there are different sources and different estimates is because there is no registry. We'll get more into the details for that in the coming videos. But the point is, all of these numbers are kind of guesses. Some of them more informed guesses than others, but at the end of the day, they're all kind of guesses. And being that we want to have the best possible picture from a guess, most of these guesses are extremely conservative. Not like the political values type of conservative, but like the being careful not to overestimate or overinflate or make these numbers seem like they're more than they actually are. So the likelihood of these estimates being smaller than reality is quite high. Now let me put these on the board so that we can start visualizing what's going on here. As a brief point of clarification here, this is millions, millions, and this is billions, which is another 1,000-fold more, right? Okay, so if we use these numbers and we work off of the low end, just this side, not even worrying about that side, we have 30 million gun owners. Let's say each one of those gun owners has 3 calibers: a handgun, a shotgun, and a rifle of some sort. That means that there's about 90 million stocked firearms. So that means it has a holster and a sling and enough ammo to be able to employ in some way, whether that be target shooting or home defense or whatever else. So if we think back to gun safety, needing to be proficient in practice, let's say each one of these gun owners shoots only 300 rounds every year. That's 100 rounds for each one of these calibers. That's 100 rounds for a pistol, and 100 rounds for a shotgun, and 100 rounds for a rifle. That can easily be done in less than 1 hour. So the likelihood of that happening in 1 year is realistic. Okay, so just to make sure that this is tracking, the 30 million gun owners comes from the 30 to 100 million estimated gun owners in America. That comes down here. Then multiply that by 3 calibers, which is reasonable. Most gun owners have a handgun, a shotgun, and a rifle, which gives us 90 million stocked firearms, SF. So let's multiply 300 rounds a year by that 90 million stocked firearms. Results in 27 billion rounds that are fired every year. Now 27 is a suboptimal number. I like nice round numbers. I'm just going to go ahead and round up to 30 billion rounds. If you think that that's unreasonable, just go talk to one of your friends that has a gun and they'll let you know they always shoot more ammo than they intend to. Okay, the next step is that the FBI tells us that there are about 33,000 gun deaths per year in America. So now to play a bit of a probabilities game. Working on the low end here, so using the smallest numbers possible, for all of the possibilities that someone could die from a gun, I'm going to take the 480 million guns that are in America, not the 600, and the 30 million gun owners that own those guns in America, not the 100, and the 30 billion rounds of ammo per year, not the 50. I'm going to multiply them all together to get the total number of possibilities where someone could possibly die. So that turns into a really big number. A number that I would have to use scientific notation to write down. And as soon as I do that, people lose a sense of significance of how big this number is, because you don't see how many zeros are behind it. So I'm just going to take that number and plunk it into a calculator and then divide the number of actual deaths, the 33,000, by this number. Remember, this number is the total number of opportunities there are for someone to die from a gunshot. This 33,000 are the number of people who actually do die from a gunshot every year. So I'm taking the actual number of people who do die every year in the United States from guns, and I'm dividing it by the total number of possibilities that there were for someone to die from guns. This is operating under the assumption that guns kill people. The likelihood of a gun killing someone then, when we compare who actually dies versus who could die, is a bunch of zeros and a little bit of percent down here. So It's not 77,000%. Remember, we start with a 0.0000000777103%. This is so far down the numeric scale, it's statistically zero. Just like I rounded from 27 billion rounds per year up here, I'm going to round this into a statistically significant number. So when we compare the number of deaths that do happen to the number of possible deaths that could happen, we end up with a statistical percentage of 0.00%. Now this number is all but relevant because at the end of the day, 33,000 people are still losing their lives. And just because the probability of dying from a gun is so small does not take away from the fact that we're still short 33,000 humans that otherwise would be in America. That's a crying shame. Okay, so I moved this stuff up here so that we don't lose track of it, but there needs to be a comparison made here. We have 273 million cars in the United States. With those 273 million cars, we, as Americans, drive about 3 million combined miles per year. So let's run the exact same problem that we did with firearms with cars. And we know there's about 330 million people in the United States. That includes adults, children. Not all children can necessarily drive. I figured it was reasonable to assume that maybe out of those 150 million people own a car that's on the road. That's being a little bit more generous to cars because there's a lot of firearms out there that I did not account for in my minimum lowest estimate math here. So I'm going to put these numbers through the same process and see what we come up with. Okay, so we take the total number of cars, multiply it by the total number of miles driven, multiply that by the number of car owners, and we get a really big number. Then we take the total deaths and divide it by that number to get this percentage. Again, treating it the same way that we did up here, statistically, it's about 0.00%. Comparing the likelihood of dying in a car versus the actual number of deaths that America experiences every year from car deaths. Here I tried to draw kind of the equivalent numbers to show that I'm accounting for the same number of variables in the same way. They're both statistically at 0%. And yet, between the two of them, 33,000 plus 36,000, we have about 70,000 people every year that die between guns and cars. However, if we use this likelihood and compare it to this likelihood, i.e. presented as a fraction. So if we divide this number by this number to see how much more likely we are to die from a car crash than from a gunshot, we come up with about 2,600 times more likely to die from a car than from a gunshot. And yet people are still talking about banning guns. Now I think that I've shown that guns can't by themselves kill people. That the person behind the gun is the one doing the killing. Very similar to how cars can't kill people by themselves. The person piloting or driving the car does the killing. And yet people are obsessed with these ideas of gun bans or caliber bans or feature bans. Let me ask you this. If we're going to try to make America safer by banning an assault rifle, why aren't we also trying to make America safer by banning supercars or hypercars, something like Ferraris and Lamborghinis? People don't need the ability to go 200 miles an hour anyway, right? Just like the same people would say we don't need high capacity magazines. It's kind of the same argument. However, just like when we look at gun death statistics, we're going to find that an inordinately small number of deaths out of this number come from assault rifles. Just like if we looked at the statistics, we'll find that an inordinately small number of car deaths, this number here, come from supercars and hypercars. The focus is on the wrong thing. The focus should be that there's still 36,000 deaths from cars every year. A lot of this can be decreased by distracted driving, like texting and so on and such forth. We still have 33,000 deaths from guns every year. And in a few episodes from now, I'm going to take a hard look at these statistics to come up with real, bona fide solutions on how we, collectively, as a society, can decrease this number significantly. But let's not forget, if a person is passionate about gun deaths, or about wanting to keep deaths from guns from happening, they should never do anything other than drive when they drive. No texting, no daydreaming, no eating or combing hair or doing any of that stuff, because the same number of people can actually be saved if we stay engaged on the roads the whole time. So levity aside with all of these crazy statistics and mental gymnastics, let's call it. This number, as I learned about this stuff, this number intrigued me. 30 to 50 billion rounds of ammo per year. Again, going back to Basic Firearm Safety, episode 20, to maintain proficiency, a firearm owner needs to shoot to stay proficient. So, before we get into the hard statistics and a hard look at the deaths, and then the resulting solutions of how to prevent them, it's time to take a look at some ammunition. How it's put together, what it takes to get to this number. See you next time.